You are at cruise altitude, halfway through a 4-hour sector. The flight is smooth, autopilot engaged. The cabin interphone chimes. The lead flight attendant reports, "Captain, we have a faint burning smell near the forward galley. It's intermittent. We can't see anything and the ovens are off." There are no ECAM or ICAS alerts, no master caution lights. You acknowledge the report and tell them to investigate further. Less than a minute later, the interphone chimes again. It's the same flight attendant, her voice now tight with urgency. It's stronger now. Definitely an acrid smell, like plastic. And the panel wall next to the forward lavatory feels warm to the touch. The clock is now running. You have no formal system warning, but you have a credible human sensor. What are your immediate actions? What is your primary threat assessment? We're diving into exactly that and more in this episode with our guest, an airline captain and subject matter expert on abnormal and emergency procedures. Stay tuned. Also, quick reminder, 99% of you watching or listening aren't subscribed. If you find this content useful, hit that button. It helps more than you think. Okay, let's unpack that scenario you just heard. You're in cruise, everything's quiet, feels routine, right? And then, bam, that interphone chimes.
Yep.
The initial report is just faint and intermittent. And importantly, your ECANs, totally silent.
Nothing.
So what's actually going through your head as the pilot at that very first really subtle report? How do you even start to assess something that ambiguous when all your fancy systems are saying, nope, everything's fine?
Well, it's fascinating because that very ambiguity, that's really the hallmark of so many real-world smoke events. They almost never start with, a big blaring horn or a master caution light flashing.
Not like in the movies.
Exactly. It often starts as just a question, a sensory clue, a smell that you can't immediately put your finger on. Our super sophisticated detection systems, they're great, but they don't always pick up those really subtle smells. But a flight attendant knows.
Oh, the original smoke detector.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly sensitive, highly calibrated sensor. So even though you have zero formal system warnings, you do have a credible human sensor. And that right there, that's your first critical piece of data. You absolutely have to trust it.
Okay, so you're already paying close attention. But then, less than a minute later, things escalate.
And
fast. Stronger now. Definitely an acrid smell, like plastic. And the panel wall feels warm. That immediate jump from faint to acrid and warm,
absolutely,
that has to completely shift your perspective. Right?
Absolutely.
How does your internal threat assessment pivot at that exact moment? Is there like a specific mental trigger when those words come in, making you think, okay, this is it?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is precisely where the clock truly starts ticking loudly. A faint smell is, well, it's a warning shot maybe, but an acrid smell, like burning plastic. And warmth on a panel, that points to something active, something serious.
Right, not just spilled coffee.
Definitely not. And this raises a huge question for us as pilots. Do you wait? Do you delay action, hoping for a system alert to confirm what your crew is telling you? Or do you treat even that first faint cabin smoke report as an emergency from second one?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. And the data from industry studies, it's chillingly clear. A hidden fire can become totally uncontrollable in about 8 minutes. 8!
Wow.
Which leaves you maybe 15 to 20 minutes total to get the aircraft safely on the ground.
Yeah, that's no time at all at cruise altitude.
It's nothing. Swiss Air 111 is just such a stark, tragic example of this. Only 20 minutes and 40 seconds passed from the very first smell being reported to the crash.
20 minutes.
It just hammers home how incredibly precious every single second is in these situations. You can't afford to wait.
You mentioned how incredibly fast things can escalate, and that really drives home why smoke just feels like a different beast entirely compared to other problems.
Absolutely is.
We often talk about troubleshooting, a hydraulic leak and maybe an engine issue, where you might actually have some time to run through a checklist, maybe figure things out. But smoke and fire, they seem unique.
Yeah.
From your experience, what makes an in-flight smoke event so uniquely dangerous?
It comes down to a few core things, and they all feed into each other. First, like we just said, it's that extreme time criticality. That 8-minute window for a fire to go wild and that 15-20-minute landing window. That's not theoretical.
That's the hard reality.
That's the razor's edge. Delaying action, hoping for more confirmation, maybe trying to troubleshoot too long, that's often fatal. Unlike some mechanical problems that might stabilize or you can manage, this problem only gets worse with time. Exponentially worse.
So it sounds like you're saying the aircraft's own warning systems, they aren't always your first or even your best line of defense here.
That's exactly right. Smoke and fumes often present with really incomplete or even conflicting cues. You might get absolute no cockpit alarm, nothing. Just a smell, maybe a light haze creeping in.
So your nose, or the cabin crew's nose,
Becomes your most crucial sensor, especially for those hidden fires, deep in the plumbing runs or in complex wiring bundles behind panels or in the avionics bays. Those are especially dangerous because they give almost no early indication.
right, smoldering away silently.
Exactly. And pilots, naturally, we often hesitate. You want confirmation, right? You want the airplane to tell you something's wrong. But by the time smoke is obvious in the flight deck, that fire might already be beyond control. So you're constantly fighting against time and this lack of definitive information. It's a tough spot.
And, I mean, it goes without saying the stakes are just unbelievably high.
Unbelievably high. The fatality risk is immense. And it's not just about staying airborne. Smoke and toxic gases kill quickly, often tragically, even after a successful emergency landing. You think about Air Canada 797.
Right, the fire on the ground.
Exactly. 23 people died from smoke in that flash fire after they landed. Not in the air. So unlike a mechanical issue where you might, weigh your options, maybe continue to destination if it's safe, smoke or fire means one thing: land. ASAP.
Period.
It's a totally different beast, demands a completely different mindset, no hesitation.
Okay, so we know it's time critical, it's insidious, often hidden, but where does this stuff actually start? My first thought, maybe like a lot of listeners, is, it's got to be the galley oven, right?
If only it were always that simple.
So what does the data tell us? What are the most common culprits for in-flight smoke? Are there any sources that might surprise us?
Well, the galley is a frequent source. You're not wrong there. Ovens, coffee makers, even just the wiring in the galley units can overheat or short out. And interestingly, these are often picked up first by the cabin crew, not by the aircraft's systems, again, highlighting those human sensors.
Right.
Another common spot, and this one did lead to major changes, is lavatories.
Really?
Lavatories.
Yep. Wiring, sometimes even small trash incinerators they used to have. Air Canada 797 back in '83, the one we just mentioned, that fire started in the aft lavatory. It burned undetected for about 15 minutes.
15 minutes? How? Because back then, there were no smoke detectors required in labs. Can you believe it? Smoke just quietly filled the cabin ceiling area. By the time people smelled it down below, it was way too late. That tragedy is the direct reason why lavatory smoke detectors are now mandatory everywhere.
Wow, so those little no-smoking placards are backed by some pretty grim history then.
Yeah.
What about other hidden areas? Cargo, things passengers never see.
Oh, absolutely. Cargo compartments are a big one, especially now with lithium batteries everywhere, sometimes undeclared, sometimes just faulty.
Lithium batteries, yeah, you hear about those.
And while modern cargo holds have good detection and suppression systems, like halon, a really intense fire, especially a lithium battery fire, can sometimes overwhelm them. UPS Flight 6 in 2010, that was a 747 freighter lost due to a hidden lithium battery fire in the cargo.
Despite the halon.
The fire just kept going. But maybe the single biggest category, statistically, it accounts for something like 37% of incidents, is the avionics and electrical bays.
37%, that's huge.
It is. We're talking wiring faults, issues with in-flight entertainment systems. Those complex IFE boxes generate heat or even leaks from the air conditioning packs getting onto wiring. Aging wiring especially can start smoldering with very little warning. Just a faint electrical smell long before anything else shows up.
That's pretty unsettling, all that hidden stuff humming away.
It is. And then you have other sources too, less common maybe, but still serious. Things like bleed air leaks or hydraulic fluid leaking onto hot components that can cause fumes or smoke in the cabin.
Okay, so it could be almost anywhere.
Pretty much. And here's the kicker. In practice, crews often cannot locate the exact source during the flight. Many, many incident reports end with source unidentified.
So you're chasing a ghost.
You are. And by the time smoke gets thick, trying to meticulously go through dozens of circuit breakers, pulling panels, it's often impossible and wastes critical time. The absolute key takeaway here is you must assume the worst until it's proven safe. Because when smoke is real, minutes, seconds truly count.
Okay, so scenario. You've got that acrid smell confirmed, maybe that warm panel. You know the clock is ticking. You've assessed the threat as high. What are your immediate, muscle memory actions in the cockpit?
Yeah.
First things first, how do you protect yourselves and make sure you can still try the airplane?
Right. The very, very first thing, before you touch anything else, before you even think about checklists, protect yourselves. Ensure you can maintain control of the aircraft. And that means masks on. Immediately.
Quick dawn masks.
Exactly. Modern jets have these quick dawn masks. You should be able to get it on, sealed, with one hand in under 5 seconds. Practice that. They have built-in microphones that activate automatically when you breathe, which is just fantastic for communication.
Essential, I imagine.
Absolutely. And you want 100% oxygen at positive pressure flow. That positive pressure helps keep smoke out if it does get into the cockpit. And don't just mask up the pilot flying. The entire flight crew goes on oxygen.
Right.
Early, even before you think smoke has reached the flight deck. Totally proactive. This is critical for keeping your head clear, maintaining cognitive function, and being able to communicate effectively. Smoke inhalation, even a little bit, can incapacitate you incredibly fast.
I can only imagine how disorienting it must be if smoke does start filling the flight deck. I mean, that's not exactly VFR conditions you train for every day.
No, it's incredibly disorienting. It can make flying visually, well, basically impossible. Dense smoke can completely obscure your instruments, your view outside, maybe even the runway on final approach. It happens in seconds.
You mentioned UPS-6 earlier.
Yeah, a classic example. The cockpit filled with smoke so fast, within minutes, they ended up having to hand over control completely to the autopilot because they just couldn't see. They struggled even to see the displays later on.
Wow.
And there was a study, I think by the BEA, the French accident investigators. They put pilots in a simulator with smoke. Even in the sim, they struggled just to read the PFD, the primary flight display, because they fumbled getting their smoke goggles on properly over the oxygen mask.
So it really highlights the need for muscle memory.
Absolutely critical. You need to be able to reach and identify essential controls, gear handle, flap lever, essential switches completely by feel without looking.
Yeah.
Because you might not be able to look. And remember, just putting the mask on introduces its own challenges.
Like what?
Communication becomes harder. You've got the noise of the oxygen flowing. You're talking through a mask microphone. It can be muffled or distorted. So now you're dealing with potential zero visibility and degraded communication, all while under immense pressure. Being mentally prepped, having that muscle memory, it's paramount.
Okay, so masks are on. You're breathing clean O2. You've got your QRH nearby, your quick reference handbook, that trusty checklist. How do you balance actually following that procedure with the sheer raw urgency of a smoke event? Is it just step by step, or does this demand something more fluid?
That's a great question, and it hits right at the heart of the land ASAP philosophy. Most modern smoke checklists, they start with immediate actions. Things designed to be done quickly, simply, and they're often reversible if needed.
Like what kind of actions?
Things like land ASAP, usually in big, bold red letters right at the top, masks on 100% oxygen, which you've already done, establishing crew communication, and then actions to try and stop smoke recirculation, like maybe turning off cabin fans or identifying and isolating a potential electrical source if it's obvious.
Okay.
But then the checklist guides you to a really critical decision point, and it usually boils down to, is the source identified, and is it extinguished or under control? If the answer is no, or if the situation is clearly getting worse, if smoke persists or intensifies, then landing becomes the absolute non-negotiable priority.
Over finishing the checklist.
Absolutely. The checklist itself often explicitly says something like, continuing with the full smoke checklist would delay the landing, and we know what delays can mean.
So you might actually have to consciously decide to abandon the checklist items.
Precisely. From the very first whiff of smoke or that first credible report, crews are trained or should be to anticipate an immediate diversion. Running the checklist should never delay starting that diversion process.
So they happen in parallel.
Exactly. As soon as smoke is confirmed, or even just strongly suspected, you should be thinking diversion. Getting weather for nearby airports, pulling up approach charts, telling ATC you might need to divert, all happening concurrently with those first few immediate checklist steps. Declaring the emergency, planning the descent, that happens now, not after you've methodically ticked off every box in the QRH.
Because sticking rigidly to the procedure could cost you time you don't have.
We've tragically seen it happen. Swissair 111, for example. They spent precious minutes working through checklists, even dumping fuel, before committing to a rapid descent and diversion. UPS-6, similarly. The crew seemed to rigidly follow the specific cargo fire checklist steps, even as the smoke became overwhelming and started disabling systems in them.
So the procedure became the enemy.
In those cases, arguably, yes. It cost precious, irreplaceable time. In a real-world escalating smoke event, you absolutely may have to abandon the later parts of the checklist and just prioritize getting on the ground immediately. It's about proactive, decisive action, not just procedure following.
You mentioned earlier that the cabin crew are your human sensors, and their reports are obviously critical. What specific kind of information do you, as the pilot, really need from them when smoke or that acrid smell appears? How can they best support you guys up front during such a, well, fluid and dangerous situation?
Yeah, their input is absolutely vital. It's your primary early warning system, often your only warning initially. To be truly useful, though, their report needs to be really clear, accurate, and urgent.
No ambiguity if possible.
Right. Best practice is always to have one designated liaison, usually the lead flight attendant or purser, communicate directly with the cockpit. That avoids confusion, conflicting reports,
Makes sense.
And they need to give concrete information, not just there's smoke, where, be specific, aft galley oven, overhead bin above row 25. If they can possibly identify a source, great, but location is key.
And describe the smoke itself.
Yes. Describe the severity. What's the color? White, gray, black. What's the density? Is it just a light haze or is it thick, billowing smoke? And the odor that's critical too. Is it electrical, chemical, oily? Strong, acrid plastic smell. That tells us a lot.
And what of the passengers?
Definitely mention any passenger reactions or symptoms. Are people coughing, nauseated, panicked, using wet cloths? A really good, concise report might sound something like, Captain, let FA here. We have dense gray smoke billowing from under the last row lavatory door on the right side. Strong chemical odor. 2 passengers nearby are coughing and holding wet towels to their faces.
Clear, concise, actionable.
Exactly. And crucially, no fluff. No downplaying. Avoid phrases like, oh, I think it's probably nothing, or maybe it's getting better. Just report what you see, smell, and hear, as is, without interpretation. And importantly, don't use the word fire unless you actually see flames.
Okay. Just smoke or fumes.
Right. And time is everything here. If a crew member smells something suspicious, they need to report it immediately. Don't wait 5 minutes to see if it goes away or gets worse. The captain needs to know right now, even if it turns out to be minor. That initial judgment call is vital.
Okay, you've run through the immediate actions, masks are on, you've got a decent report from the cabin. But what if you still can't pinpoint the source? What if you're chasing that ghost, like you said, and the smoke just persists? What's the doctrine? What's the protocol when the origin remains a frustrating and, frankly, terrifying mystery?
Yeah, that's a tough scenario, but the guidance is actually pretty clear, if stark. When the smoke's origin can't be nailed down in flight, the doctrine shifts heavily towards treating it as an active, uncontained, and immediate threat. The focus instantly moves from managing the situation to ending the situation by getting the aircraft on the ground. Now.
So, no more troubleshooting time.
Essentially, no. If smoke persists or the source just remains unclear, you don't wait around hoping for confirmation of a fire. You initiate an emergency descent and prepare to land immediately. That land ASAP mantra. In Airbus terms, for example, it explicitly means you're ready to divert at once.
Not just thinking about it.
Not thinking about it, doing it. It allows for and expects potentially extraordinary actions, things like an overweight landing. You don't have time to dump fuel down to max landing weight, maybe a tailwind in landing if that runway's significantly closer or gets you down minutes faster. Even in the most extreme case, ditching, if that's deemed the safest way to get people out now.
So you basically forget your planned destination, forget the ideal airport, and you pick the closest runway that works, even if it's not one you normally use.
That's precisely it. You treat any adequate airport along your immediate route as a viable diversion. Doesn't matter if it's unfamiliar, doesn't matter if your airline doesn't normally fly there. You find the nearest suitable field. Your focus shifts entirely away from fiddling with systems checklists and squarely onto flying the airplane, setting heading, altitude, speed, configuring for landing. You prepare for the approach, not for more systems management. From cruise altitude, remember, an emergency descent down to pattern altitude can take as little as 5 to 7 minutes if you're really booking it with max drag and speed.
That's fast.
It is, and you might only have about 15 minutes total before smoke could seriously affect critical systems or even start incapacitating the crew. So, fuel concerns, weight concerns, largely secondary. You dump fuel en route if you have the time and capability, fine, but you land overweight if you have to, even if the runway is shorter than you'd like or maybe has a slope. The overwhelming priority is getting on the ground safely and swiftly. End the threat.
This all sounds, well, incredibly intense, demanding split-second decisions under huge pressure, often with really incomplete information. How do we as pilots actually train effectively for something so ambiguous and so time critical? What are the typical gaps in simulator training maybe, and what's really vital for pilots to practice?
That's such a critical question because honestly, realistic smoke and fire training, it has historically been a bit scarce or maybe not focused on the right aspects. Most standard simulator sessions, they're really good at mimicking things like engine fires or cargo fire warnings things with clear enunciations.
Right, the ones with bells and lights.
Exactly. They don't always replicate these subtle, creeping, smell-only or fume-only scenarios that often precede a major incident. Standard emergency drills tend to focus on those visible fires or the enunciated warnings, not the unannounced smoke that forces you to interpret and act decisively based on, frankly, incomplete data.
So we might not be getting enough practice with the really insidious stuff.
Often that's been the case. One of the biggest acknowledged gaps historically was realistic practice with the masks and goggles on and trying to communicate effectively in a simulated, degraded environment.
Makes sense. It's one thing to talk about it.
And it's another thing entirely to do it. Thankfully, recent mandates, like the FAA's Advisory Circular 12080A and similar European directives, they now explicitly require hands-on training with the oxygen mask and the smoke goggles, and practicing communication while wearing them, ideally under simulated smoke conditions.
So actually putting the gear on in this sense.
Yes. After UPS 6, for instance, the FAA really pushed for recurrent training where pilots actually don the mask and goggles and then have to perform tasks, read a checklist, manipulate controls, and simulated zero visibility smoke. If your training program isn't emphasizing this kind of hands-on practice lately, it's definitely something worth advocating for.
Because you need that muscle memory.
You absolutely need that muscle memory for the controls, and you need the experience of communicating through the mask. Even with great training, though, these real-life evolving smoke events, they really test your depth of knowledge, your situational awareness, and your ability to act decisively under pressure. That's why even doing a quick pre-brief before flight can be surprisingly helpful. Just saying, okay, if we get a smoke indication now, our initial plan is X.
Planting that seed.
Exactly. Just having that initial thought process done ahead of time can save valuable seconds if the real thing happens.
This has been a really, really eye-opening discussion. It covers a truly terrifying scenario, but also highlights the clear, decisive actions that can and do save lives. Before we wrap up, what are those absolute fast facts, those key takeaways about in-flight smoke that pilots, or really anyone flying, should never, ever forget?
Okay, the essentials. First, your nose, or your crew's nose, is often the most sensitive smoke detector on the entire aircraft. Trust it, don't dismiss it.
Got it. Trust the human sensor.
Second, cabin crew reports are your primary alert system in many cases, not some secondary nuisance. Treat their information as gold.
Critical intel.
Third, remember that a significant number of real-world smoke events give you zero system alerts, no bells, no lights, until the fire has already caused significant damage or might even be uncontrollable. Don't wait for the airplane to agree with the humans.
Okay. Don't wait for confirmation.
Fourth, time. Time is your most valuable and most perishable resource. Every single second you spend debating, hesitating, hoping it goes away, that's a second lost. Possibly forever.
Time is everything.
And finally, land ASAP. It does not mean land as soon as practical or land when convenient. It means now. Initiate the diversion, get down, get on the ground.
Land ASAP means now.
Got it. So what does this all really mean for you, the pilot listening right now? I guess it means taking that initial understandable fear and channeling it, converting it into clear, decisive control, even when the picture isn't perfectly sharp. Absolutely. By drilling these lessons, understanding the priorities, practicing the procedures from the cockpit drills to cabin crew communication, you transform that hidden, insidious threat into a handled emergency. Smoke is incredibly dangerous, yes. But with the right mindset, proactive decision-making, and that critical, realistic training, you land safe. That's the goal.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of the Captain Podcast. A big thank you to our guest for sharing their expertise and helping us understand the complexities surrounding this topic. As always, we appreciate you tuning in. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing. Your support really helps us continue to bring valuable content. Feel free to leave your comment or suggest any topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Until next time, fly safe, stay sharp, and we'll catch you on the next episode.